Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar, How to Write a Research Project and Expression of Interest. We will start the webinar with Dr. Nathalie Vermeulen, Senior Research Specialist at ESHRE. She will give a short introduction about the grant and explain the practicalities and technical details. After that, Dr. Roger Sturmey, Basic Science Officer at the ESHRE Special Interest Group Embryology, will tell you everything you need to know about how to write a research project and expression of interest. After the webinar, we will have some time for questions. You can enter your questions in the chat box and we will go through them at the end of the webinar. So, Dr. Vermeulen, I give the floor to you.
Thank you. Good morning. So I will start with the technical details of the ESHRE research grant. Yeah. So as you know, we have a guide for applicants, which is on our website. These are just the details for you to find all the information after this webinar. Yes. Next. So the ESHRE research grant has some guiding principles. We are in 2020 awarding 2 grants, one of 75,000 euros and one of 200,000 euros. Projects can be submitted up to a duration with a duration of up to 3 years. The coordinator should always be an ESHRE member. Project will be selected based on scientific excellence, originality, and feasibility. You can submit either as an individual or as a research team with a maximum of 7 researchers, and you should have support from your host institution. For the grant of 2020, we will focus on 2 themes. So for the small grant, the project should focus on sperm freezing and function. And for the big grant of 200,000 euros, you should focus on protecting and treating male fertility. Yes. So the first step is to submit your expression of interest. We have an online submission portal for that. You can find it on the ESHRE website. The expression of interest should be submitted by the coordinator, and you have to log in with your ESHRE username and password. This will also help us to check that whether you are an ESHRE member. You can only submit when you are a member. And the format is strictly limited, and you can find all these limits in the guide for applicants, but you have to provide, as you know, some information on the project and some information on the investigators. So the deadline for submission, as you should know, is the 1st of April. Yeah. Next slide. So some remarks that might help you. It's good to be short and precise in your grant expression of interest. You should make sure that there's no confidential information in your project description. Everything should be written in English, of course. For reasons with the online submission portal, it's helpful to avoid special characters and formulae. You should not identify your identity or your institution's identity in the project. Of course, you have to submit it separately as the information on the investigators, but not in the project description. The budget section should be clearly written in euro. You should also have some details there, not just the total requested budget. Same for the duration of the project, should be clearly stated. And of course, you agree if you submit your expression of interest that it can be sent out for review. Yeah. So we will check all the expression of interest we receive. So we will check whether the coordinator is an ESHRE member. We will check whether it's submitted just before the deadline. We will check whether it's complete and all the fields have been filled in. And we will check compliance with the restrictions on the team, the budget, and the duration. If you don't, if your proposal doesn't fit these criteria, you will be excluded from review and from funding. If you fit these criteria, your project will be sent out to 3 reviewers who will do a blind scoring, and we will have the results by the end, mid of July. Yeah. So some information on your chances. These are just historical data from 2018. where we had some different amounts, smaller amounts, but we had 70 proposals for a big grant and 40 for the small grant. And of each of them, we selected 10 proposals for the second round of review. So you would have a 1 in a 7 or 1 in a 4 chance of being selected for the second round. And then in the second round, there's 1 proposal out of 10 who gets awarded the grant. Regarding the second round, so if you pass the first round, you will get some detailed instructions about how to send in your extended research proposal, and the deadline for that is September 2020. Okay, Porter, word is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Natalie, and thank you for joining this webinar wherever you are. You join me from Hull, which is in the north of England. I'm sitting in my office, and I'm going to try and give you some tips that might help you in preparing a research proposal. They're quite general tips. They're quite general things that I've learned through too many years of too many failed but some successful applications. So as you've heard, it's really crucial before you apply to actually make a decision to apply. And to decide to apply, you really should check the eligibility criteria. Are you eligible? If you're not eligible, don't spend the time writing an expression of interest. But if you are eligible, then great. Then be honest with yourself. Do you have a good idea? Is your idea strong? Do you have supporting data? And crucially, does your idea fit with the topic, which, as we've heard, is all about the male this year? I'd recommend nobody putting in a grant proposal on the effects of maternal obesity this year. You then want to check whether you can do the research. Do you have the skills necessary? Do you have the equipment necessary? Do you have the team in place? Do you have the facilities? Because if you can't do the research, you probably shouldn't be requesting funding for it. And linked to that, do you have the support? Do you have the support of your institution, whether that's your clinic or your university? I've already mentioned, do you have the equipment necessary? And do you have the necessary collaborations, if indeed you do need collaborations? If you can answer yes to all of those questions, then get writing, have a go, put an application together. As you've already heard, the application process for the ESHRE grants has 2 phases. First of all is the pre-application or the expression of interest phase. The expression of interest is quite a short document. However, my advice to you is actually write your full project, write it out in detail, have a good idea of what your project is and condense it for the pre-application. Don't start small and then try and expand if you're successful at the expression of interest phase. You really need to start this early and really need, I think, to have a good idea about what your project will be. Being positive, being bold. I'm going to be successful. Start your conversations early with your team and collaborators. Make sure they're all on board. But also, especially if you're working with some big names, make sure they can all commit to what they're saying they can commit to and within the timeframes. You really don't want to be starting writing this or getting feedback on this 2 or 3 days before the deadline. So really be clear with the timeframes that you need yourself and your colleagues and collaborators to work with. Check again now that your idea does fit with the call. Spend some detail, spend some time reviewing the documents on the ESHRE website, making sure that now you've got a fuller idea of your project, which will have evolved as you'll have been thinking about your idea. Does it still fit the call? And I'm going to drop an extra line in here. Start thinking about the budget. Start thinking about the fund. Can you do the project that you propose on time and on budget? If you're going for the bigger grant, that's €200,000. And if you're going for the smaller grant, that's €75,000. But can you do what you're planning to do within that money? Because it's very difficult to propose a big project and then try and scale it back, and you end up cutting corners, and that really does come at the detriment to the research. Spend time to start writing. This is general feedback for pretty much anything you'll ever write, but certainly for any funding proposal, and this is the cycle that I work to. I start a draft. Remember that good writing starts with bad writing. So start writing something, write your draft, and then get some feedback. Get feedback early on from your team, from your collaborators, from your colleagues. But if possible, get some external feedback. If you've got colleagues who aren't directly involved with the grant, but who you trust to give you really good, honest, robust feedback, then do that. Get that feedback early. It's better to have the criticisms before you submit the project so that you can then address them before you've gone out to review. On the basis of your feedback, rework your proposal and go around that cycle 2 or 3 times, making sure that you have the strongest project and the strongest expression of interest that you and your team can put together. Once you're happy, submit. And it goes without saying, make sure you submit before the deadline. You really don't want to miss that deadline by an hour or a few moments after you've done all this work, because as you've heard, if the grant isn't submitted before the deadline, it won't be sent out for review. And then wait. My advice, forget about it. Try and put it out of your mind, get on with the next grant proposal, get on with the next paper, but just wait while it goes through this anonymous review phase. As you've heard, last time around, there were 71 applications for the larger grants and 40 applications for the smaller grants, and 10 of each were selected to go forward. That means the majority of expressions of interest that were submitted were unsuccessful. It's easy for me to say this, well, actually it's quite hard for me to say this because this happens all too often. Don't get too disheartened. Many excellent proposals won't get selected. There is a limit to what ESHRE can fund. There is a limit to what any funding agency can fund. If you do get any feedback, review it. Can you use it for improving your applications elsewhere? Because nothing that you write is ever wasted. If your idea was good, then seek other funding. Look for national funders, look for international funding agencies, maybe charity or industry. There is sadly no magic formula for getting a grant funded, and even the most successful researchers will have many more grants unsuccessfully funded than know that they get funded. If you are successful, congratulations, well done. Remember that many excellent proposals didn't get funded. But again, have you got any feedback? Can you use that feedback to improve your application? If you are successful at the expression of interest phase, then it's time to start writing the grant proper, to really start getting stuck in. And at this point, I would advise, read what you said you would do, because that time has elapsed and you'll be focused on other things. So go back and read your expression of interest in detail, and go back and think about that bigger project proposal that you drafted at the start. It's now time to start your main application. It's time to expand the plan of the project. But if you've thought about the project in its broadest sense, you should have a lot of this all prepared. So it's a case of now refining it into project speak. I read projects, I review projects, I write projects. And the questions that I look for and the questions that I try and address are what, why, and why. What is your research question? What is the question that you are trying to answer? Crucially, why is this project important? Why is this question important? Why should this project be done now? Why is it timely? Why is it relevant? And why should you be doing this project? What is your track record? What confidence can you give the funder in your ability to deliver the project? And what confidence can you give the funder in your ability to deliver the good value for money? Because an investment is being made into you and your project. And that's the way to think about it. It is an investment. So try and think about these questions and try and think about leaving your reader, your reviewer, and your funder with very clear answers to these kinds of questions. So I'm going to use a bit of an analogy for the funding proposal. I'm going to use the analogy of going fishing. Okay. So the first part of going fishing is having a hook to catch your fish. The hook of your grant proposal is the summary. This is the key, crucial part, and this is the part that the reader is going to read. First of all, before they read the whole proposal, they're going to read your summary. And the reviewer will subconsciously make a decision about their view of your project on the basis of the summary. So you have to get that summary right. Catch the reader, get them interested, get them wanting to read more. If your summary is hard work for the reader to read, they're less likely to look at your grant proposal favourably. Having your summary the clear messages, it may not be completely obvious, but by the end of your summary, your reviewer should have a good idea of what the question is, why this project is important, and why now. And keep returning to these central points throughout the proposal. Keep returning to the hook. You then need to write the background. This is the thing that holds your hook together, the foundations of your proposal. What is the hole that your work will fill? What is the gap in our knowledge that your work will fill? What is the new treatment, the new development that's going to help patients? Expand on those details. Why this question? Why now? And why you? Why is this the time to invest in this project? By the end of your background, if it's written effectively, your reader will know what you want to do, but more crucially, why it is important. And then think about your objectives. Well, if you're going fishing, the objective of going fishing is to have a tasty meal at the end of it, a nice piece of fish. When you think about your research proposal, think about your objectives. What are the objectives of your research proposal? Number them. Objective 1, Objective 2, and so on. Make them clear, achievable, and measurable. Can you demonstrate that you have met each of those objectives? And ideally, you would like your objectives to not be interdependent. If Objective 2 relies on Objective 1 working, that puts reviewers on edge a little bit, because what happens if Objective 1 doesn't go quite to plan? Does that mean the whole project is blown out of the water? You really want to try and make objectives, to an extent, independent and not codependent on each other. And again, by the time you reach the end of your objective stage, your reader should know exactly what you will have accomplished if this project is successful. There should be no doubt in the reader's mind. And then the methods. How are you going to go fishing? In this case, I'm going to go and stand in a river and try and cast my rod and try and catch some fish. How am I going to tackle my objectives? Link your methods to the objectives. To address Objective 1, I will use these approaches. To address Objective 2, I will use these approaches. Describe how you will design your study. Who are you going to do your research on? Is it participants? Is it patients? Is it samples? And what are the practical methods that you will use to do this research? Again, giving very clear, very direct confidence in the reader that you can do these methods. Ideally, in an ideal world, a grant proposal should have some evidence that you and your team, between you, have effectively used all of the proposed methods in some way. If in a proposal such as this, you say that you're going to go and use, for instance, CRISPR, but you've never used CRISPR technologies and methodologies, that's quite a risk for the funder. Whereas if you're an expert in using CRISPR, the funder will be able to think, actually, that team are very good at using that method, so we don't have to worry about whether they will achieve it. So in some way, you really want to try and demonstrate that you have some experience of all of your proposed methods. Think about limitations and risks. In the case of fishing, the seabirds may come and steal the fish. In the case of your grant proposal, there are some limitations and there are some risks. All research has limitations. Try and acknowledge them. Try and be honest about what they are and demonstrate that you know what the limits of your research are and why they aren't a major issue. And again, ideally, you'll be able to demonstrate, for instance, if the risk is methodological, that because you've got experience in the methods, you can counteract all of those problems. And again, to give the reviewer and the funder confidence, demonstrate that you've thought about the risks and what you're going to try and do to minimize them. We can't remove risk from life, but we can try and reduce the effects of them. So try and give that some thought and let that come through your grant proposal. Think about the likelihood of any risks and the impact. So is something very likely but of low impact, or something extremely unlikely, but if it were to happen, it would be of a significant impact for the project? Consider that and try and consider how you would overcome them. We want our research to have an impact. We want it to have a result. In the case of my fishing expedition, I want them to build a monument to the fish that I'm going to catch. That's the impact. In terms of research, what is the impact of your research? Why does it matter? Why is your question, why is your project going to matter? And who will feel the impact? Will it be patients? Will it be other scientists and clinicians, or will it be the wider public? And what I would say with impact is, whilst it's important to consider the impact of your research, try and be realistic and try and give measurable examples of how that impact will be shown. So don't say you're going to cure male factor infertility if you can't demonstrate that you actually achieve it. Also, don't say you're going to cure male factor infertility if it's not feasible. With regards to your impact, try and make it feasible. And think about how you will realise your impact, how you will deliver on it. So for instance, if you say your impact is to help patients, don't then say that your sole way of sharing the results of this work is in human reproduction, because most patients don't actually read human reproduction. You may need to think about other ways that you can share the impact of your research. You may want to think about adding value to your research proposal, and we've talked about teams. In my experience, science always works best in collaboration. Rather than standing there on my own with my fishing rod, it might help me to get a friend who's got a boat. Similarly with your project, it might help you to bring in colleagues and collaborators who can enhance your skill set, who can give experience and maximise results and outputs. But when including collaborators, make sure that it's a cohesive fit. Make sure that if you are putting a team together, you can demonstrate how the team will work and what value over and above you working on your own the team brings. We work in what can be viewed as quite a contentious area of research, so it is wise to consider the legal and ethical aspects of the work and how that sits within your own region where you're carrying out your research. Address these legal and ethical aspects clearly. State what the ethical impacts are, consider them, don't pretend they're not there. Again, personal advice, it's always worth it, if possible, to show patient or public input or opinion in your research. Do the patients think this question is important, or is it just something that I've dreamt up in my lab? You will need to demonstrate that the research that you plan to carry out will be in accordance with whatever regulatory framework is necessary for the region in which you're conducting the research. And in that regard, I really would recommend you work with your institutional legal department to review the grant terms and the conditions. Does this fit with what is required? The budget. You are asking for money, you are asking for an investment. You have to demonstrate how that money is going to be spent. Work out the costs appropriately and effectively. Wherever possible, agree these with your institution early. Start thinking about what those budgets will be, including what we refer to as on costs. So for instance, if you plan to employ a researcher on your project, you need to think about all of the costs associated with that researcher, not just the salary. And again, really think and be honest, can the project that you are proposing be delivered for the budget that you are requesting? Because there is no more money and you really don't want to run it short of budget before the project is completed. The problem with grant proposals is there's never enough space to get in all of this information that I've said you really want to try and get through. But there is an important role for annexes. And it is really worth spending time on these important aspects. Don't focus solely 100% of your efforts on the application form, because your annex is the place to show your Gantt chart. Your Gantt chart will give real confidence to your reviewers that you've been very thoughtful in how you're going to deliver and manage this project. Your work plan. And if you have any supporting data that gives confidence that you can deliver, place that in your annex as well. And then when you've done all that, try and put it down for a night or two. Try and take a breather from it and then proofread it. Find all those typos, find all those errors, find all those sentences that don't quite make sense. And then go through that review cycle again. Get some colleagues to proofread it and review it. And try and give yourself good time to submit. And all I have to say after this is if you do choose to submit your grant proposal, I wish you the very best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sturmey, and thank you very much. Let me see if we can have some questions. There was someone who was asking if we could send an example of a successful project proposal.
It's a question for the SRA head office.
Yeah, well, I don't think we can do that just for confidential reasons. And I don't think people would like their project to be shared with everyone. Well, actually, I can't really say more about this.
Okay. Does someone else have some questions? We don't have new ones.
I know there were some questions that came through on email in advance of the webinar. Would you like me to try and address those?
Yeah, you can do that.
Okay, so there were 4 questions that came in. One of them was about success rates, which Natalie has talked about. The success rate partly depends on the number of proposals that are submitted, but do bear in mind that ESHRE will fund 2 projects, one at 200,000, one at 75,000. So your success rate depends on the number of projects submitted. The second question was regarding the advantages for collaboration and whether to include developing nations. Now, I don't think ESHRE have a specific guidance on this.
No.
What I would say about collaborations, and I did try and touch upon this in my presentation, collaboration usually enhances a project. It usually makes a project better. But don't just force a collaboration that isn't there for the sake of trying to make your project look better. It really should add value to the project that you're doing. It really should make the proposal better and stronger. So think very carefully about the collaborators that you choose. The third question was about the criteria on which the project is selected upon. Now, I've never sat on this panel, so I don't know for definite, and maybe Natalie can say something after me, but in general, projects are funded or chosen essentially on scientific excellence, value for money, feasibility, and confidence in the researchers. The funder needs to have confidence the research can deliver. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Natalie?
No, that's exactly what we select on. These are our criteria as well.
And the final question that came on email was about whether a clinical trial would have any advantage. And again, I don't think ESHRE has a formal view on clinical trials, but I may be incorrect there. But what I would say is that if you're considering doing a clinical trial, think very carefully about the budget. Clinical trials are expensive, especially to conduct well. They require a high degree of research governance and research oversight. So be very honest about whether you could actually conduct and complete a clinical trial within budget. It may be more advantageous for you to do a pre-trial or a piece of work that would lead to a clinical trial if successful. Again, I don't know if there's any formal guidance there from ESHRE, Natalie.
Well, specifically for this grant, we try to focus on more newer ideas. So pilot studies might even have bigger chances than clinical trials, where you do something really innovative, where there's not always some grants, I know, focus really on results, while we focus less on results, and we want to give a chance to quite innovative projects that might not work at all, but still, you know, people can try.
That's a very rare funder.
Exactly. That's a gap, so that's why we did decide on that. We received another question whether a company can be the coordinator of a research project. We actually don't have any exclusion criteria regarding this. So anyone who is an ESHRE member can submit a research proposal. That's no exclusion. That we already covered. There's a question, will we get a revision with reasons as feedback if the grant proposal is not accepted? ESHRE will not give any feedback in the first round. So in the first round, you only have to submit an expression of interest, which is very short. And we don't give any feedback on that, also for practical reasons. When you send in an extended proposal, we will send it out to 5 expert reviewers, and we will ask them specifically for some feedback to the grant applicants. So you will get a nice summary of their comments in the second round, but not in the first round. There's another question, innovative in technical aspects. For example, new methodologies to investigate sperm function. I think that's an excellent idea, and I would definitely ask you to submit your project. It does fit very well with what we want from this grant. There's a question, what is the time period for the project? So projects can have a duration of up to 3 years. So your project should be finalized within 3 years. If it's really necessary, you can ask for an extension with another year, but to try to keep it at 3 years. Can you apply for both grants? Well, as you can be coordinator for only one project. So for either the small or the big grants, but you can be in the research team of another project. So you can be coordinator of one project for one grant and be in the research team for the other grant. Did we miss any questions?
I think so.
Maybe there was one comment again on sharing a successful proposal we have on our website. A short summary on with the titles of the previous proposals that received the grant and the investigators. But for also that's also in the grant agreement, we can't share any more details on these projects. Does it matter if it's done in more than one country, and is there any person limitation to participate in the project? So more than one center. So as Roger already mentioned, collaboration is always very good. It's an advantage for your project. So if you have a multi-center project, that's excellent. We tend to limit to 7 investigators, so the coordinator and 6 associated investigators in our projects. According to the, sorry, I will read it out loud. According to the eligibility criteria, there are no limitations on career stage for applicants. But having said that, have young investigators received a grant in the past? This one. Okay. So in the first round, with the expression of interest, it's scored blindly. So actually the reviewers won't see who submitted the project. And also in the second round, there is the expert reviewers will look at your research team. If you're as a coordinator or a young investigator, that's no reason not to get the funding. But I would say that it's helpful to be part of a bigger research team with some experienced researchers, with a good promoter or colleagues or collaborators. But we don't select based on career stage for the applicants. Maybe Roger has a comment on that as well.
Yeah, I think one thing that's really worth considering, especially for early career researchers that may be on short-term contracts, you have to think about whether your contract will extend beyond the lifetime of the grant, or you have to think about costing your own salary in as the researcher to do the grant. So for instance, if you have a 2-year contract and you write a 3-year project and your contract at your employer ends after 2 years, who will continue the research? So in the UK, for instance, in British universities, you are not allowed to put a grant in for consideration if your contract doesn't stretch beyond the length of the time of the project. So do make sure that you are actually going to be employed and employable for the entire duration of the project.
Okay. There's maybe also another question for you. What impact will Brexit have?
Next question. I'm hoping, I don't think ESHRE have made a comment on it, and just because the UK has chosen to leave the European Union, it's not a condition that only European Union countries can apply for the ESHRE grant. I'm correct there, aren't I?
No, it's not limited to any countries, so anyone can submit a project. So the Brexit won't really have an impact there.
At least not on that.
No. What else? Is this a pure scientific research, or can it also be commercial interests? That's a tricky question. I think we want to focus on, as I said, innovative research. Whether it can be commercially used afterwards, that's not really a big item in our selection procedure. We also actually have one project which we funded, which is now looking into patenting their findings. So ESHRE has no restrictions whatsoever regarding this. Can Can the collaboration be established between a European study group and one from the USA? That's definitely possible. There's no restrictions on this at all. Next question, can animal work be conducted? Or is it just investigating human male fertility? We definitely don't have any restrictions either on animal research. So you can definitely use and submit your study. How will intellectual property be dealt with? I can share afterwards. If you just send me a quick email to grant@eshwe.eu, I can share our grant agreement, where there's a section on this. This is all very technical stuff, but in fact, Eshwe doesn't retain any intellectual property or any rights to your research. We just give the money, and the only thing we ask for is that you have an annual report and that you mention that it was an Eshwe funded study, very limited things we ask from you. But I can share the grant agreement for this. Can you expand a bit regarding the themes of the current call? The themes are sperm freezing and function for the small grant, and protecting and treating male fertility for the big grant. It's a theme. It's not really the title of your project. So your project should be linked to that theme. It should be clear how this is linked to the theme. But I can't really. Maybe Roger can help me with that.
I think they're very broad themes. I think they're very nice to give applicants a really good idea, a really good area of scope to think in the broadest sense about what their research might do to either improve or consider the impacts and effects of sperm freezing in terms of function. And with regards to the bigger grant, that really is as broad as it comes, protecting and treating male fertility. What can we do to do that? How can we address that top level theme? So be creative, be clever, be smart. You are the people that are coming up with the ideas.
Exactly.
Does someone else have a question? I think we reached the end of all the questions. So yeah, I think we can close the webinar now. Thank you again, Dr. Vermeulen and Dr. Sturmy, for having the webinar. And thank you everyone for participating and for asking all these questions. It was very, very interesting and very helpful. The webinar has been recorded, so you will receive an email after the webinar with the recording. And if you still come up with any questions after this, you can always send an email to grant@eshwe.eu, and we will answer you as soon as possible. Thank you again. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.